She didn't have a lot of boundaries.
Yeah, good way of putting it. Yeah, that's for sure.
We are now streaming. It is 5 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen. Do you want to begin? Do we feel like we want to begin?
Sure.
We can begin. We can always begin.
Okay. What do you say, Mark? Are you ready? Shall we begin?
I think we're ready.
Okay, we're streaming live on Facebook. We are LIT BALM. Welcome to everybody who zoomed in today. We are LIT BALM. We are your literary anodyne. We are your balm in Gilead. We are, I hope, a bit of relief during these difficult times, a little bit of literary relief for you. Tonight, we have a fabulous show. We have Kristina Bicher, we have special guest Norman Finkelstein, and we have the awesome Terese Svoboda. So we have a wonderful feature section for you, and then we'll have our open. But first, let's open with an introduction of our hosts. I'd like to tell you about my co-host, Mark Vincennes, who is going to read a poem for you. Mark has published 14 books of poetry. That's as of now. In the next week, he might have published another 14, including more recently Leaning into the Infinite, Dos Madres, The Syndicate of Water and Lights from Station Hill Press, and Here Comes the Night Dust from Salmon Poetry. Vincennes is also a prolific translator and has published 10 books of translation. Most recently, Unexpected Development from White Pine Press by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist Klaus Mertz, and this was a finalist for the 2016 Cliff Becker Book Prize in Translation. His work has received fellowships and grants from the Swiss Arts Council, the Literary Colloquium Berlin, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Witterbinner Foundation for Poetry. Please help me welcome Mark as he reads us a poem.
Yay.
This is from a new collection that I'm working on at the moment. It's called Here, the Fragment of a Kiss. Caught on camera years ago, right there under your birthmark, beneath your cheekbone, in that space you called rigidity, and the warmth that arose from the pit of your stomach in a wave of red rose, in that blush of contentment and impossible rhetoric, the splinter of a life well known. To rise from the underworld and reach the frontier all aglare, in the faces of friends, and the foe reading in between the lines, the hypnosis of hydroponics, and the lined up ancient monkey heads, the goats, nose against the panes, the ridged horns clanking on glass, and the windows bursting wide open. Darkness hanging down there, way down, back there on surface earth, where we are in the know, where we are all moving parts transparent, asleep at the wheel, where we are sycamore trees, all fingers stretching into infinity, where we are warmed paths, traveled, warmed perhaps on horseback, or where we walk, the solemn and the absurd, on all fours and all the tracks, the trails we drag through the melting snow, through this oh so hallowed ground.
Thank you so much, Mark. Some warm parts, much needed for us tonight. So I would like to introduce my other co-host, Jonathan Penton, but he is not here tonight, and for a very good reason. Jonathan Penton, editor of Unlikely Stories, got married today to the lovely and talented Roz Spencer, editor of the journal Rigorous. And I was blessed to see them exchange their vows. They're going to do it up proud after the social distancing is over. They're going to do a big party in New Orleans, but they did their ceremony today. They are officially married. And I would like, in honor of their marriage, I would like to read a poem of mine that was published in the Penguin Book of Wedding Vows. It's called, the book is called Words for the Wedding. This poem also appears in my collection in Paran, and it's called Personal. And this is going out to Roz and Jonathan, the happy couple. Personal. I want to know what makes you tick. I want to know what makes you fickle. I want to know what makes you stick. Tell me, which ion propels you? Which soothsayer spells you? Which folk singer trills you? Which heartwood distills you? Which downward dog twists you? Which protest resists you? Which neural net fires you? Which siren desires you? Which villanelle sings you? Which jailbreaker springs you? Which Uncle Sam wants you? Which calculus daunts you? Which lullaby lulls you? Which confidence gulls you? Which apple you'll bite from? Which hither you'll welcome? What makes me forget the right answers, consult necromancers, allow the forbidden, ignore the guilt-ridden, unlearn all the learning, embrace this new burning to know what makes you tick. Congratulations, Roz and Jonathan, two of the finest people on this planet, I tell you. It's a very happy day for us all. All right, we will now move into the feature section of our program, and I'm going to bring up first Kristina Andersson Bicher. Kristina is a poet and translator living in New York. She Giant in the Land of Here We Go Again is her debut full-length poetry collection. Her chapbook, Just Now Alive, FLP, 2014, was a finalist for the New Women's Voices Prize. Her translation of Marie Lundquist's I Walk Around Gathering Up My Garden for the Night will be published in 2020 in a bilingual edition by Bitter Oleander Press. Kristina's poems and translations have been, essays, translations, poems, and interviews have been published in Plowshares, Colorado Review, Hayden's Ferry, Narrative, Barrow Street, Painted Bride Quarterly, The Atlantic, Plume, Brooklyn Rail, and others. She attended the Breadloaf Translation Conference and has earned degrees from Harvard and Sarah Lawrence. Kristina, welcome and take it away.
Thank you so much. It's great to be on this show. And Larissa, I loved that poem. I loved how the rhyme and the repetition was so inventive and kind of carried me along on that journey. That was terrific.
Thank you.
So this is the book, She Giant, and big shout out to Mark Vincennes, who and Mad Hat Press are the publishers of this book. And I am just thrilled to see it in the world. So I wanted to start with Start in the Beginning, which is a poem in the garden, well, actually just after the Garden of Eden. Some of these poems in this collection are about Omen and what we know and what we could have known and maybe we should have done differently. So this poem is called And Eve Knew Before. Lord, I can't sleep for fear of my son. I know the rage of Cain, the blame he hoards, visions that plague, what fevers him for days, how fire singes night's edge, and I cannot sleep for fear. I can't dream for my son, Lord. I cannot dream to dream. Two small boys on a dust floor, I, the heart of one, mind of the other. I reap lambs and cold grasses, the black glare of Cain's eyes and the black back of Abel, lifting, sinking mine, night without moon. I don't breathe. Hear the night steps of Cain, how he opens the tent flap and lets the desert in, a cold roar of stars. War is coming, Lord. Close your palm around me, seal my eyes, turn me out again and again, then to know what I do. I see sword tips bloom orange at earth's end where you left me. Remember when we met? It was a Saturday. Remember how I swayed for you under trees? Then a couple of, well, I'll just go into the next set of poems. They don't need much explanation. And I'll read several in a row. The first is called First Night. All dark gesture and whatever ghosts. Night holds the voices. The bed waits. Shake out the quilt of what remains, and snow comes through the ceiling. Prayer. Mother, today I met a man. We drank chocolate in the square. He showed me his drawings. Then he led me to the farthest wood to meet an old friend. It was a tree. Mother, he was lonely. He had a penknife and I found a stick, and the mountain watched and said nothing. I dreamt I was a large spoon racketing the walls of an empty tin pail. Mother, there is no sign of disease, yet all these warnings. All night, roosters keen and the churches won't stop belling. All night, the dogs despair, cry out from one to the next until they have strung a net of worry over us all. I pull shut the curtains and still the mountain sees. Mother, they say you must ask the mountain permission. The people throw small lights at its feet and bright tiny flags. If the mountain were just one man, I would beat it with a stick. Mother, I am not myself. On the first day, a volcano sank into my eye. On the first day, I made a small church of my tears. I bought gold shoes so I might fly. He was a penknife, I was a stick. Mother, was he so lonely? The men call the mountain beautiful. The women quiver sometimes. I dreamt a feather flew under my door. The beer ran black and I ate with strangers. And when I screamed, paper flowers grew from out my mouth. It goes like this with mountains, with men. He rises, I sink. Mother, when I sleep, the mountain takes a step closer. I don't sleep, Mother. All night the cats lament in the street, they lament. Their throats are knotted grief. Mother, today I met a man. Lament. We were on a cliff we couldn't see the edge of, naked on night grass. I on my right side, he on his back. I fed him jam pie salted with the ocean's white noise. A rose tide above and the voices of stones buried beneath. Wild stars of white aster sprang from our feet. Sub rosa amo. Once we get off this island, we will never speak. 1 year in. His ambivalence and my ambivalence meet in a coffee shop on the Upper East Side. We conclude our exes should get together. The triple ginger scones with plum we once loved are now too rich. He continues to talk in circles. I do nothing to improve my life. I still come to him with the hunger of a junkie. Our night dreams are kaleidoscopic and encyclopedic. It has become impossible to sleep without his hand on my belly. Our goals are not only divergent, but wholly antithetical. Jamaica is the new Iceland. My breasts are still perfect. I take him sailing. He takes me to Lars von Trier's Nymphomania, volumes 1 and 2. We invent new ways to distrust each other. More women enter our bed. There is talk of Botox. I buy him heat-proof spatulas. He buys me handmade paper. He's gained weight since we met. I think this means he's happy. From her diary. He asks if I like it, being slapped. like that. Does it make you hot? I say yes. Yes, like that. So he must choose how hard he wants to believe my answer. But this body sparks. When my flesh enters the cup of his hand, it bites back. His bent arm begs its own forgiveness. Or is it my permission that devastates? He says harder, I say yes. Woman cooking. He is 5 days gone and far. An anvil has formed dark in her hollows, sunk into rib and wet lung, crushing into the flint of her hips. The body closes around it. With her large tined fork, cow bones are moved around the iron pot, slick with oil and stout bay leaf. Fists of meat, bronze and sweeten, then relinquish. There is no sun. But what you say is, I have lain, walked through, memorized each, and when you take it, nothing. The famine that follows. We die not from fire, but its quenching. The flames set down, then a barrenness. Our tongues a thick bulb, a memory of water. Our hungers hoarded in the throat. We will fall upon each other with forks and fingers. We will eat our very names.
One more, Kristina.
Yep, that's all I have is one more. It's perfect. This is called Ephemera. And in it, there's some found text from a newspaper article. Ephemera. A cello's voice rises up the stairwell. Russians just dug up more ancient birch bark scrolls. Send me a shirt, towel, trousers, reins, wrote a man called Onis. If I'm alive, I will pay for it. Because of the wind, the dog barks. Because of the wind, a child's scream from a far-off swing set lodges in the upper echelons of the oak. Sunk in bogs, scrolls under roads in Novgorod. Marry me, I want you, you want me, says Mikita to Anna. At the center of the Milky Way, a dormant black hole. Onfim draws an ugly creature, I beast. A son opens cupboards, removes 2 plates. A girl somewhere takes pills, gloss blue oval, emerald and white gel capsule. Such a fine world today, says a voice on the machine. I hope you get out. There's coffee in the air. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful poems and wonderful Mother's Day themed poems. Thank you so much, Kristina.
Thank you, Kristina.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question for our reading, Kristina. We are asking tonight, we always ask a question of our readers, and I'm going to ask Mark in a little bit too. What are you reading? What's on your bedstand now? What are you reading?
Well, I just ordered this fabulous translation, and it was a Spanish dictionary that was written in around 1610. And a woman named Janet Hendrickson just translated it into a very vibrant, quirky, sort of fantastic creature. She took some liberties with it, but it really just jumps off the page. So that's my big love this week.
Oh, that's wonderful. Very wonderful, wonderfully eclectic. I love it.
Yes.
Okay, splendid. We are live on Facebook. People on Facebook, thanks for watching.
Yeah, thank you, Kristina.
And thank you, Kristina. Thank you very much, Kristina. And we are live on Facebook. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm now happy to bring up our next poet. We have with us, I'm glad to say, a special guest. We have Norman Finkelstein with us today. Norman is a poet and a literary critic. He has published extensively on modern poetry and on Jewish American literature. His most recent books are The Ratio of Reason to Magic, New and Selected Poems. That's from Dos Madres. From the files of the Eminent Foundation, also Dos Madres, and Like a Dark Rabbi, Modern Poetry and the Jewish Literary Imagination from Hebrew Union College Press. Next year, Dos Madres will publish his new collection of poems, In a Broken Star. He is professor of English at Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he has taught since 1980. Please, a warm welcome for Norman Finkelstein.
Hi, everybody. I suppose you're wondering what that background is behind me.
Yes.
That is the Forevertron, which is the world's largest scrap metal sculpture. And it is located outside of Madison, Wisconsin. And the creator of that sculpture is Dr. Evermore, AKA Tom Every. And that sculpture park where this enormous thing is to be found is holy ground for me. Tom was one of the greatest outsider artists that America has ever produced. He passed away on March 30th. He had been ill a long time. It was not the virus, as far as I know. He had been in a nursing home and had a number of strokes. He was 81. Though he was still, up until recently, he was still building. He was still making sculpture. And some years ago, I visited the park, I met him, and I wrote a poem. So this is in memory of Dr. Evermore. Forevertron. I have built a machine to visit the stars. I have built a machine to outlast the stars. There is a glass ball inside a copper egg. There are dynamos and turbines, Tesla coils and magnets. There is a boy in Brooklyn, Wisconsin, and a boy in Eddington, England. They are the same boy. There is a man in a hat in Baraboo. They are all named Tom. They are all named Dr. Evermore, which is now their real name. Queen Victoria is watching among the giant insects, the fiddle-shaped birds. The stray voltage goes in the stray voltage cages, all silver, red, and blue. The music will signal the ascent. This is the overlord master control. This is the graviton. These are the celestial listening ears. When you ask me what has changed my life, I tell you motors, generators, compressors, transformers. I tell you boilers, pumps, transmitters, and flywheels. When you ask me if I found them, I say no. I rescued them. So that is for Dr. Evermore. The rest of what I'm going to read is relatively new work, all coming out in the new book next year. And I'm going to read the title sequence, In a Broken Star, which comes out of a rather intense 12 days in the summer of 2017, when my wife and I took a long desired trip to 4 Middle European capitals. We went to Berlin, we went to Prague, we went to Budapest, we went to Vienna. And let me tell you, we packed a lot in those 12 days. So here we go. This is In a Broken Star. Each individual poem, it doesn't have a title. It uses its first line as a title. In a broken star, the words fall into the words, but the machine says, blow across my screen, and the letters rise up and become a page upon a page crossing the centuries. The machine says, look, and you will understand. A tiny book in a space cut into a foreigner carrying in the crook of his arm a tiny book. A miniature scroll in a space cut into on longing narratives of the miniature, the gigantic, the souvenir, the collection. And on the gigantic canvas, dolls' dresses, girls' dresses, or a figure impaled by shards of glass, its head a tree of emanations. A single girder in the worn brick wall, beneath the exposed, rusted column, the eternal lamp found beneath the concrete, marble fragments, faded golden stars. House of names, house of the dead. We walked out into the sunshine, walked into the cemetery's shade, whimsy and horror, photos and souvenirs. On Doheny Street, the silver willow in the fenced courtyard past the graves, the guides in the sanctuary speaking French, speaking Hebrew, regale the tourists. The puppet master on all the billboards tells us nothing has really changed. This is the truth, the whole truth, holy and whole, written in clay that comes to life, comes into life. Fallen clay, fallen figure, comes and goes from life into life. And vistas, eternal vistas, internal vistas on which to brood. The sunlight on the rivers, bridges and palaces, cathedrals on which to brood. Crowds on the banks, blood on the banks, eternal vistas, internal vistas on which to brood. Sometimes the poem is a kiss upon the cheek, sometimes a blow to the back of the skull. But the music there is always perfect in the ancient basement or gilded hall. The cymbalum and violin in the ruin bars and elegant restaurants, so that the poem wanders off, dazed by love, wounded by hatred, while the music plays on. Ships and sultans, triumphal cars, stags, satyrs, and goddesses enthroned, the musicians and the cogwheels behind the musicians all come to life with a golden key. The door opens. The peasant drops his pants, farts melodiously, while the arrows fly, the cannons fire, the centaurs charge. This purse is filled with coins, with gems. Here comes the devil. Better run away. We are all sepia, photos on a napkin ring. We are all on the stairwell, caught by the maidservant. There are so many of us here in the apartment, so many of us in the crimson waiting room. I was glued to the steps and unable to budge from the spot. Okay. I'm going to read 2 or 3 more. And these are from another section of the new book called Retrieved Documents. And they're tangentially related to my previous book, From the Files of the Immanent Foundation. So if any of you are out there are familiar with that book, you will hear that tonally, at least, these are pretty similar. And the first one is called Escape Clause. From the deep wells of solipsism to the avenue of the bureaucrats, this is the neosurgence of the erotic hyperreal, erupting in the psyche, erupting in the streets, explaining itself and freeing itself of all explanation. The containment units were never designed to work at such intensities. The material is always beside itself, always supplemental. You may say it should remain hidden, buried, encrypted. You may say this force, this expedition, goes nowhere or recedes into a hazy distance, past tense, past tremulous, to a place that is here and then gone. What did you expect? Seabird, white giant, five-sided entities from beyond the stars. When the glaciers collapse and fall into the polar sea, when you peer ahead into the mists, when with a deafening roar, when with absolute silence, you close the book and put on a sweater, the old stories autocorrect to the new urbanism, the new verbalism, a failure of the dream work too vast to comprehend. If you are unable or unwilling to accept this fate, please join the line forming to the left. This escape clause, this independent clause, this being below the rank of the sentence will avert the severe decree. Oh. Like some of the poems in Immanent Foundation, most of the titles of these have poems having to do with a type of discourse or a genre. So this is called After the Briefing. More vocalization, more localization, but when released into the water, it continues to grow. Its influence spreads, and in the contest of hither and yon, the advantage shifts to the far side. Wishful thinking? Precisely. These are only pen and ink drawings. The colorist will complete the project at a later date. Very few word balloons are necessary, for such is not the way of this narrative, which depends upon the structure of the frame, perspective, and scale. The worshipful figures rise up from unknown depths, assuming strange postures. But this communication, sent from this particular communicant, refers to gifts of another sort, and the degree of gratification for all involved remains open to question. I have been thinking lately of how, in the course of things, the unaccountable disappearances accumulate, take up more space in my memory, so that my own voice becomes increasingly necessary for articulating what is really a cosmic condition. Imagine then how love is found and lost and found again. Oops. Pardon me.
Hey, how are you?
Imagine then how love is found and lost and found again. Imagine then the rules, the procedures, the organization to which constitute an enormous fantasy.
Hello.
Hold on a second. Let's see if we can find who the culprit is.
Oh, it's Henry Weinfield. Sorry about that.
You want to call me another time?
I'm reading.
Can you mute yourself?
Wow. Okay. I thought he had been watching.
I can't see who it is. Can you, Larissa?
It's a phone. It's a phone. It's his phone.
Yeah, but pretty much everyone is muted except for, well, pretty much everyone is muted.
But
it is literally his phone.
I think we're back.
I see. Gotcha. Okay, your own phone. Okay.
Let me see. I think I'm going to just start one more poem and that will be it. Or should I finish the one that I was reading?
Read the one you were just reading, Norman, okay?
Okay, I'll start at the top. Here we go. After the briefing, more vocalization, more localization, but when released into the water, it continues to grow. Its influence spreads, and in the contest of hither and yon, the advantage shifts to the far side. Wishful thinking? Precisely. These are only pen and ink drawings. The colorist will complete the project at a later date. Very few word balloons are necessary, for such is not the way of this narrative, which depends upon the structure of the frame, perspective, and scale. The worshipful figures rise up from unknown depths, assuming strange postures. But this communication, sent from this particular communicant, refers to gifts of another sort. And the degree of gratification for all involved remains open to question. I have been thinking lately of how, in the course of things, the unaccountable disappearances accumulate, take up more space in my memory, so that my own voice becomes increasingly necessary for articulating what is really a cosmic condition. Imagine then how love is found and lost and found again. Imagine then the rules, the procedures, the organizations, all of which constitute an enormous fantasy which pushes continually against boundaries erroneously thought to be real. Consider it giving way.
Thank you so very, very much, Norman. That was wonderful. That was eternal, internal, a kiss on the cheek, a slap on the back of the head. Thank you so very, very much.
Slap on the back of my head.
Let me ask you, Norman, what are you reading? What are you currently, what's on your bedstand?
Well, you know, this is going to sound outrageous, but I'm reading War and Peace.
Good for you. I love it.
I have never read it before, and you know, I'm about to retire, and I said, all right, the first serious book I'm going to read after I retire is War and Peace. So I'm 100 pages into it and loving it.
This is I'm a Tolstoyan, so I love Anna Karenina and War and Peace. That's wonderful. You will love it.
I think I'm going to move through it really fast too. I mean, I've got some time on my hands after all.
Yeah, they say it's a page turner. Thank you so much, Norman. Everybody, give Norman a hand, please. All right.
Now that's my old friend Terese, I think.
Next, oh, as long as I have you here, Mark, listen, what are you reading? I didn't ask you.
What am I reading at the moment? I am reading the collected works of Emily Dickinson from cover to cover, page to page, word to word. And if anyone's been paying attention, Mark Scroggins, who is somewhere here in the constellation, just wrote a fantastic article about the new Susan Howe book, which mentions Emily Dickinson. So everyone go and have a look at that.
You know that all of Dickinson's poems can be sung to the Yellow Rose of Texas.
Speak to Mark about that. Don't speak to me about it.
I could not stop for death. He kindly stopped for me.
Okay.
Sorry, but that's wonderful, Mark. Thank you so very much. That's wonderful. Okay, I am thrilled to bring up our last reader. The Bloomsbury Review writes, Terese Svoboda is one of those writers you would be tempted to read regardless of the setting or the period or the plot or even the genre. She has published 18 books of fiction, poetry, memoir, biography, and a book of translation from the Newer. Ladies and gentlemen, the Newer are a Nilotic peoples who live in the Nile Valley. Wow, Terese. There's more wow coming. Winner of a Guggenheim, a Bobst Prize in Fiction, an Iowa Prize for Poetry, an NEH grant for translation, an O. Henry Award for the short story, the Grey Wolf Nonfiction Prize, 3 NIFA fellowships, a Pushcart Prize for the essay, a Bellagio residency for a libretto, and the Jerome Foundation Award in video. She also wrote the libretto for the opera Wet that premiered at LA's Red Cat Theater. Great American Desert, a book of stories, appeared last March and was starred by both Booklist and Kirkus Play Poems is forthcoming from Anhinga in 2021. Please help me welcome Terese Svoboda.
Hi.
Hi.
Sound insecure. That's what it sounds like on a resume like that. So look at this. There are like 33 people here all listening. A special thanks to, of course, Mark and Larissa. And hello to my friends Dave Blair and Jay Rubin, who are non-poets. And hello to all the poets. I'm going to read 4 poems. The first one is sort of a fever dream of COVID, if you can take any further comment on that particular issue. It's called DXM Bond. DXM, you know, is a cough medicine. A sideways crouch toward your husband, je suis fatigué, the cough threatening a rooftop chase through your head. Your husband with his hands up and soaked, the syrup of cell death sliding off, the cell-laden helicopter lifting the lace of my old lady armchair, once dressed in a bikini, the torso, not the chair, because this is crossfire, the bullets bouncing like mercury loosed from its sheath, sex left over from the last scene barely remembered as lived, the bikini straps broken, you as unfaithful as the imagined butler who exits with his hesitation intact. Almost thoughtful, swaying away, feverish, fevered, the tense past. Bodies pile up. On our knees now for Deus ex machina, to drop his big hypodermic from the cloud, not the place that remembers every keystroke. Hear DXM complain, always with the sky, scanning it nonetheless for bond tailoring. We wait inexorial non-hand-holding, getting old, getting older. Antibodies still very pro. Noah Horse. It's from a manuscript called Ark. Was it steady, a drizzle, a trickle under the door? People with their cloaks over their heads, dodging, the donkey's back bright with wet? Or did it whip and howl, and everyone bolted their doors and ate hot soup, then held their breaths making love, one eye on the window? The first, a dull, mechanical disaster. Who left the faucet on? The second, Shakespearean. Fortune brings in some boats that are not steered. You don't have to be an animist to believe that weather is God standing on your roof when your wet veil sinks, or your boy, hit by a wrong sawn board, floats face down. The dripping, that's Hitchcock. The swells swelling, the rusting swords, Noah Horse, every prick of a shower triggering stress. So that manuscript's, you know, all about ye old climate crisis. And this poem is Shame Helps, and it's from Theatrics Play Poems that Anhinga's publishing next year. A kind of a very weird, it's a very weird book. It's about drama, sort of, it's on the page, but it sort of takes its own bow. Hard to explain. Shame Helps. A sudden not breeze fills the air. 2 men dressed in corduroy approach, one pulling a boat of agony. Hi-ho, greeting, greeting, fleeting smile both, the word smile left on the faces of the fourth wall. How to read that? The optic nerve gets it up. What has been done weighs the high. The smarter of the men has a dollar hanging from a pocket, acquisitive or generous. Balance implies a man out of sight line, removing his shoes. Why a man is the question. The philosopher in the second row wants to punch the usher. Such restraint stupefies the audience into paradoxical sleep. They worry, but their eyeballs still roll. And if the heavens help with a hole in the roof above the lights, drip, drip, the two men look to the exit, shamed, unwilling to follow one or the other without a speech. Let us bury Caesar. I hope we find some sand. Creepy, the way birds in stillness sing. So I'm working on a second memoir, and this one called Hitler and My Mother-in-Law. I'm very fond of the title, but actually it has to do with the fact that she was a war correspondent in World War II and posed for a picture in which she pointed down to a pile of ashes, which were supposed to be Hitler. Anyway, that's a segue to tell you that I've been reading a lot about World War II and thinking about Hitler and, as you might imagine, our current leader. So this is a new, fresh poem. It's probably terrible. Guns in the theater of protest. Look at me on MLK Day. If that isn't supremacy, just a day before the ha-ha-ha president removal farce starts, where is the face-off like, say, Bob Woodward Xeroxing? I hope you all remember who Bob Woodward is. Well, oh, whistleblower, you need more whistling and less blowing. But what do we know? A moment on TV, our leader soliciting, I did nothing wrong. Demonstrators cock their guns, not Democrats. Wrong, as in, thank you.
That's wonderful, fabulous. Thank you so much. Terese, I can only echo what Kierkegaard wrote about you. Svoboda's enigmatic sentences, elliptical narratives, and percussive plots delve into the possibilities of form, genre, and plausible futures, but always on the eye of the vast subterranean psychologies of her all too real creations. Thank you so much. And Terese, may we ask you, what are you reading now?
Well, I can't find the title, but it's about Nabokov's dreams. Princeton University Press put out this book, which is kind of impossible to read, but still, apparently, Vladimir became obsessed toward the end of his life and certain that his dreams would also forecast the future. And so this book shows, in some instances, how that was true. And also Nora Sayer's memoir, On the Wing, and How the Universe Was Made by Stephanie Strickland. It was her selected.
That's wonderful. Thank you so very much, Terese. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me give a warm thanks to our featured readers tonight, Kristina Andersson Bicher, Norman Finkelstein, and Terese Svoboda. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you for easing the pandemic for us today. We appreciate it. Do join us next week when our reading celebrates the New Orleans Poetry Festival with a panel. Megan Burns and Bill Lavender will be here reading their work and discussing it, and it will be moderated by Jonathan Penton. And on the 23rd, we have a wonderful show for you. We have Kevin Gallagher, Joanna Solfrion, and the inimitable Amy King. So do join us in upcoming Saturdays at 5. We're always here Saturdays at 5. Do join us. Thank you very much. And now we will move into the open mic section of our show. And I'd like to know if F.J. Bergman is here.
She may have disappeared.
She's
I'm
not
here.
Oh, she's here.
Okay, FJ, would you like to read us a poem?
Sure, I'd be glad to. This is, I have to mention first that it was amazing to see the Forevertron come up as the background. That is one of my favorite places in Wisconsin. And I've been there many times, taken many photographs of it, and had been very infatuated with it. So it was wonderful seeing that come up again. It's inspired some of my poems, not necessarily this one. This is a poem titled Afterlife, which was nominated for this year's Rising Award from the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association, and it first appeared in a British journal, Shoreline of Infinity. Afterlife. He drank through the hallucinations that tried to entwine him in their silky ribbons. Flakes of the lost world fell around him like carnivorous snow. The beast had been willing to let him ride it, asking only his heart in exchange. It left blackened tracks on the stone. Something about the lake of fire seemed familiar. Eye makeup was the only mandatory attire these days, and the more it looked like the holes in a skull, the better. Sometimes there were teeth, Batesian mimicry. The extra limbs were already beginning to form. He hoped they would end in serrated claws. For self-defense only, of course. One deck of cards could predict futures. The other reflected only the past. But someone had shuffled both decks together. They knew where they were going, though. It's better to be the monarch of a dying planet than not to be a king at all. Everybody was falling outward from its center, falling apart. Green leaves against the black of space. That's inspiration. He was returning to the tools of a simpler time, a manual typewriter, hand-rolled cigarettes, pink nail polish. With the right wardrobe, he wouldn't need to speak or think. He could be headless. His nose and ears had always been an embarrassment. Who needed hands anyway? She turned away from the sun to smile back at him. She didn't turn into anything. She disappointed him in ways he had forgotten. He kept the stumps of his hands over where his ears had been. He had many companions by then, imaginary and otherwise, some of whom made him regret earlier decisions. Some of whom regretted nothing, not even the sacrifices, the blood-drenched furrows. He watched an imaginative God rise from a leveled horizon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, FJ. Also, I should say that, FJ works with me at Mad Hat Press. She is my amazing managing editor and creator, co-creator of many, many things. So a big hand to her.
Big hand, FJ.
I thoroughly enjoy it.
FJ, tell us what you're reading.
Well, I came across this lovely little chapbook, Cola Super Deep Borehole by Joe Fletcher, which is, I'd call it steampunk. A fictitious Russian engineer who recorded wailing souls in hell from Earth's core in the 1980s. And there's something about fake science that I kind of enjoy. So then I picked up this book by the same author, The Hatch, And I've been reading a couple of others that have science fictional elements that, or fantasy, that I've also liked quite a bit. This little chapbook, Titania in Yellow, which combines A Midsummer Night's Dream and the horror fantasy, The King in Yellow. And this lovely little collection, Soft Science by Franny Choi. Sometimes you can see this and sometimes the background kills it. But I've also been reading, and I heartily recommend Martha Wells' Murderbot series. The 5th book, The Network Effect, has just been released.
Thank you so very much, FJ. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming tonight. And thanks for all the work you do at the wonderful Mad Hat.
I love it.
I'm wondering if Bill Yarrow would grace us with a poem.
I'm thinking, is Karina van Berkom ready to read a poem as well? Karina?
Yes, I could do that.
Okay, do it.
Nice. Karina, go ahead.
All right, hold on one sec. I have to decide between two. I'm sorry if there's a little bit of background noise. Is it distracting?
I can hear your dog sniffling in the background.
She's right here. All right, 1 second. All right, so let me just close the door, sort of. Can people hear me?
Yep.
Okay. This is a poem called The Barren Wife, or The Barren Wife's Monologue. I haven't decided quite yet. I imagine my sons pushing up through the soil in a row on a lowland plot. Imagine them rising like peonies, but wretchedly human, coming up, twisting and wet. And they look like me, hard-eyed, a chin dimple on one late bloomer. And they need me, so I mind the plot, weed a circle around the fattening knees. After some years, I imagine the place spangled with my cow-licked kids. 10 hardy rows or a dozen, hollering and knocking heads. I bring water, I check on them, but in autumn they die. No exceptions. Each body buckles back into the country, richening the peat. And my heart stays secret and weeds erupt without ceremony or space for a grave.
Thank you very much, Karina. Thank you very much. What are you reading? Tell us. Can you tell us what's on your bedstand?
Sure, of course. Yeah, I'm currently reading Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, which I think I tried to read far too young. When I first heard about James Baldwin, probably in high school, and a lot of it went way over my head. So now I'm revisiting, and I've loved Baldwin's poetry too, which is lesser known. I've taught his poetry as well in some classes, but I haven't read as much of his fiction as I would like to. So I'm getting back into Giovanni's Room, and I'm loving it. It's beautiful.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Karina, for joining us tonight.
I think we have another friend over here in Vermont, Ralph. Would you like to read a poem for us?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I had to unmute myself. I thought, thank you, Mark, for asking. I thought I'd read a poem which is actually an homage to the dear late great James Tate that just went up on Ron Slate's site on the seawall. And here it is. It's called Another Thursday Off to a Fine Start. I was feeling glum and disgusted with myself, sitting in Rachel Decker's car on our way home from the Wednesday night poker game. I'd been ahead most of the evening and then stupidly misplayed my last hand. When we all gathered up our jackets and scarves to go, I was about 15 bucks in the hole. Rachel hadn't spoken much since we left Stan's apartment, and I'd said almost nothing. There was the merest suggestion of light over the hills to the east, a thin, pale outline marking the contours of the ridge. Rachel slowed the car as we approached the all-night supermarket on Doyle and said, "You mind? I just have to get a couple things." Suddenly, I had an urge to buy a box of saltines to munch on in the car the rest of the way. "Sure," I said, "sure, why not?" Inside, Rachel went off in one direction while I went in another, looking for the saltine aisle. I rounded a corner and stopped. Blocking my path was the largest cat I had ever seen outside of a zoo. It looked like an Ottoman, upholstered in spiky orange fur, if the Ottoman had enormous, glittering Caribbean blue eyes. Those eyes were something. It was as if two round-cut sapphire pendants were jammed in the cat's skull. The cat didn't move. I didn't move. And we stared at each other for a moment when a high, raspy voice behind me said, "That's Steffi." I turned my head and saw one of the third shift stock boys smiling at me. He was tall, lanky, sallow, one eyebrow cocked speculatively, wearing a name tag that read, "Hi, I'm." "Don't worry, she won't hurt you," the stock boy said. "Steffi?" I said. "Yeah, Steffi. She's just interested in reading your thoughts," the stock boy said. "Really?" I said. "Yes," he said. I glanced back at Steffi, whose eyes were still fixed on me. "She'll probably fill me in on them when I'm on my coffee break," the stock boy said. "That's nice," I said. I have always liked cats, but still. I went looking for Rachel, who was going through the checkout with a few purchases: dishwashing liquid, 3 boxes of wooden kitchen matches, a carton of soy milk, some other stuff. Back in the car, I told her about Steffi. "You never know with cats," Rachel said. It had continued to grow brighter. The hills were beginning to take form, a jade green blanket someone had casually tossed onto the horizon. My cell phone hummed in my pocket, and I looked at my watch. 5 a.m. I didn't recognize the calling number. "Hello?" I said. "Hi," a familiar voice said, although I couldn't place it. "What's up?" I said. "Steffi told me to tell you you forgot the saltines," the caller said. I opened my mouth, but kept silent. Rachel was shooting me a look. "Oh," the voice said, "another thing. Waiting on a jack to fill a straight when Danny was showing one with that face like he probably had a pair. You really should have known better." "Yeah, well," I said. I thought, where the hell were you when I needed you? "Where is anybody?" the voice said. Rachel drove on. The sun rose. Eventually, I decided we might get home.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Ralph, tell us what you're reading. What's on your bedstand?
There are 2 books right now that I'm reading. One is one's pretty short in terms of pages, but pretty heavy in terms of weight. And that is Karen McCadden's new book, which is, hold on a second, I want to make sure I get the title right. It's a collection of poems focused on the death of her brother, who was a heroin addict. And hold on just one second, I'll get back to the book.
Okay.
Okay, so that's pretty much our show. I do want to get one last reader in. If Bill, are you still on tonight?
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. We got to unmute him.
Bill has to be on.
Yeah, hi. Do you want me to read a poem? I'm happy to.
I just want to tell people that when I am depressed, I read your incompetent translations and inept haikus. I read Mark Twain and you to fight off clinical depression. So thank you. Read us a poem, Bill.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to read a poem called Ajloon Castle. It's I got to visit Jordan a few years ago, and this was a very interesting historical site. And so this is the poem about it. It's from The Dig of Love. Ajloon Castle. You, my little cat, are brisk and fluid, but I, like an owl, am stiff and staid. You clambered up the rocks and held out your arms. The wind in a swoosh came up behind you. Incredulous, I watched you fall. You did not see me looking as you stood placid, impassive, looking out over the cardamom hills. But then the wind mistook your arms for wings, and helpless, I watched you fall. Horrified, I watched you fall through the future and into the past your family, past your accolades, past your handsome penchant for reconciliation, into the universal solvent of your confidence. I saw you dashed upon low stones. I saw you bounce into the sea. I saw you sink into inky velvet. My tragedy is that my imagination pictures all the facets of disaster. But you see only soaring, and that is your invincible gift.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. Tell us what you're reading.
I am reading the works of Lucian, and currently I'm reading the Dialogues of the Dead.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that is our show for today. Thank you very much for coming. Please help me once again thank our wonderful, wonderful, wonderful features, Kristina Andersson Bicher, Norman Finkelstein, and Terese Svoboda for a fabulous reading. People on Facebook, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much. And I will end with a wedding poem.
Yeah, this is for Jonathan Penton and Roz Spencer. Yeah?
It's called Vow. We will love like dogwood, kiss like cranes, die like moths, I promise. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.